Hello everyone, and welcome to our 7th Bite-Sized Learning module we're filming as part of our Modern Slavery Impact Initiative. These are a series of conversations we're having with leading experts throughout Australia, unpacking key modern slavery risk issues for Australian businesses. And the series has been made possible through the support of the Australian Government through the National Action Plan to Combat Modern Slavery 2020 to 2025. My name is Caskey, and I look after the human rights programming at the UN Global Compact Network in Australia. And it's my privilege to be here at the Red Cross in Sydney discussing the importance of responding to modern slavery safely. So to help us unpack some of the complexities involved, it's my privilege to be joined by Natalie Maxwell-Davis, Senior Manager, Modern Slavery Prevention and Response, and Lina Garcia Daza, a lead for trafficking, forced labour and forced marriage. Thank you so much for being here. Now, I suppose just to get us started, I'd like to understand a little bit more about the Red Cross's role in Australia. So, Lina, can you just tell us a little bit more about what the Red Cross does in the survivor support space?
Sure. Thank you, Chris. So the Support for Trafficked People program is delivered by the Australian Red Cross, and the Australian Red Cross has been delivering this program for more than 12 years. Mm-hmm. So that is how we play an active role in providing support and assistance to victims and survivors. The Support for Trafficked People program is part of the whole of government response to combat and address modern slavery. And is one of the pillars of the National Action Plan to combat modern slavery. So as part of the support that we provide, we are very much strength-focused and strength-based, mm-hmm. and person-centered, which means that really we are guided by the goals, the aspirations, and the needs of each individual. So we don't have a standard response. Mm-hmm. We provide a response that is based on their needs, what they identified as their goals, and based on that, we provide the response. Our main aim is to keep them safe, to provide emotional well-being, to cover their health needs, and to make sure that they are well equipped to reintegrate to society and to life after they exit the Support for Trafficked People program. Mm-hmm. So as part of the supports that we provide, we make referrals to different services. We provide financial assistance. We make referrals to legal and immigration support when they need to. We provide education and training allowances when the clients identify that they do have a need for training and education. We make sure that they are connected to community support. And we provide emotional well-being and different supports depending on what they identified as their key areas of work.
Mm-hmm. No, that's perfect. I just want to touch on the company response process for a little bit, because we know that many companies in Australia have done, quite a lot of work putting a framework in place to try and understand where, either throughout their operations or supply chains, that they may be potentially causing or contributing to, or being directly linked to modern slavery. But we know if they directly engage with a potential worker, that could actually exacerbate the situation or make it worse. What are some of the complexities at play here? Do you sort of find this in your day-to-day work?
Yeah, thank you for that question. The complexity really is that there is no a standard response, and there is no a standard way of identifying modern slavery. Mm-hmm. So responding to modern slavery therefore cannot be standard either. Mm-hmm. That is the real complexity. And then when you think about responding to modern slavery, you really need to be thinking about your local context. What are the push factors? What are the pull factors? What is the service response? What is available for victim survivors, but also what is available for workers, what is available for the businesses. So really there is no standard response. It is based on the local context, based on the complexity, and based on the needs that are identified by a person that might be involved in a situation of modern slavery.
Mm-hmm. And what are some of the risks involved? So if a company doesn't respond safely and they don't take those contexts into account, what could go wrong in that case?
Everything. But mainly there is a huge risk of re-traumatization. Mm-hmm. So if there is no an appropriate response, there might be a risk of re-traumatization and putting a person in a very uncomfortable situation. The second one is putting the person at a higher risk of harm. And that is the most important one, that when businesses, corporates, and when the response is not the appropriate response in general, the person might be like in a position where they are exposed to a high risk of harm. And then like also like when there is not an appropriate response, you might be alerting the exploiters into what is happening, and they might be putting in place extra controls, extra violence, and extra restrictions on the movement, the communication, the ability of the person to be engaged with services, with supports available, because they are already alerted that something is going on and that there might be somebody aware of the situation of exploitation.
Thank you so much, Lina. I mean, it's obviously, you know, really important to make these processes as accessible and as effective as possible. Natalie, I'll come to you now. We know that some of the ways that some companies have been trying to make their grievance channels as accessible as possible is by including workers in the design of those processes. What would you say to a company that's just starting out on that journey or wants to actually get more worker voice in some of those channels?
I'd say that's a really good place to start because workers have told us or people who've been exposed to forced labour have told us that the only way that we are going to identify this as an issue is if we involve the workers and we create an environment where they have an understanding of their rights and they have trusted and accessible channels available for support. But the key thing there is trusted. And so if you're going to design those systems and processes as a company, I think the question you have to ask yourself is, how do you design a system that a worker can access to start with? And we've had situations where, you know, workers who are in a situation of forced labour and they cannot access communication methods. And the secondly is, do they trust those channels? And there's a couple of things there that are really important in trust. It's one, the worker has to feel when engaging that channel they'll be safe, as Lina said. And the other thing is that when a worker does engage through that channel, there needs to be some form of response, and the response needs to be safe. But if workers are engaging through channels and they're not getting any response, it's not going to maintain a situation of trust.
And are there any good practice examples you can point to in terms of building that sort of worker voice in the design of a grievance mechanism?
Yes, we're actually currently engaging with a couple of companies, and what we're doing with them is engaging with their workers, and that's not just their direct workers, but workers in their supply chain, to do capacity building sessions around modern slavery, but also to understand the workers' awareness of the channels available for support and their comfort with those channels. And, you know, what we'll do is look at it from a thematic level for the organisation as to how they can improve those channels to ensure that workers trust them. Now, the reason that we've engaged in that way is because workers trust Red Cross, and so therefore they're prepared to engage with an organisation that they know is going to look out for the workers and put the worker at the centre of any response. So I think that's a really good way to engage. The other things we're talking to organisations at the moment about is doing scenario planning. So as Lina said, you know, modern slavery can present in a myriad of different ways, and how you respond depends on how it presents and your involvement with that. So what we're talking to organisations about doing is planning out, you know, how it could present and how we would respond based on the nature of that presentation in a way that protects the workers.
I think that capacity building piece, especially with the suppliers, is so important. And that goes to, you know, what our modern slavery community and practice members have told us too, is that sort of that next tier below. And that sort of brings me to my next question, is around small business, and it may be a supplier, maybe just a small business that's standalone. How can they look to address some of these challenges, given they often have little available resource and are potentially, you know, in a more high risk sector?
Thanks for asking that question. As you rightly point out, a lot of the people, when we've spoken to people who've been exposed to forced labour in Australia, one of the things they point out is that modern slavery often happens in small organisations. It's, you know, it's hidden within supply chains, as we talk about. But I think just because you're a small business doesn't mean you can't do anything to address this. There's a lot of things that you can do that are quite simple and quite easy and don't take a lot of cost or resource. So one of the things that we've been talking to organisations about recently is how to make sure workers working for you or in your supply chain have an understanding of their entitlements. And just recently, Red Cross launched the Work Right Hub. And that's a resource that's available to everybody. So it's really easy for a small business to take that Work Right Hub and make sure it's communicated to workers. Larger organisations can take that as a resource and ask smaller organisations to push that information down to workers. And the whole aim of that Work Right Hub is that it provides workers with access to information about what their rights are and where they can go and get support if they think there might be an issue.
Mm-hmm. And are there any other sort of resources or stakeholders that you'd tell a small business or even a larger business looking to address some of these issues? Like where should they look?
There's a number of resources available, and there's a lot of resources that are tailored to industry and also to the size of the organisation. So the Global Compact Network put out its guide for small businesses on modern slavery. There's another resource that's recently been released, is a good practice guide to strengthening modern slavery response, and that's a really good resource as well. But the other thing I'd say is, in application, think about engaging with organisations that workers trust. So what audience are you trying to get to? Who are your workers and your workers in your supply chain? And what organisations will they trust? And if you engage with those organisations, you're moving towards a situation of trust to start with. Now, it still takes work, and there needs to be principles around it. But by engaging with an organisation that workers trust, you have an immediate sort of good faith base. The other thing I would say is, engaging workers and trying to get feedback on grievance mechanisms is not a static process. It should be a dynamic process. And we've got to look at ways to integrate this in the way we do things on a day-to-day basis rather than a set and forget.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I suppose just as my final question, if somebody's watching this and they are potentially experiencing, or they know somebody who's experiencing one form of modern slavery, where should they go?
There's a couple of places that they can go. So you can contact Australian Federal Police for information. You can also contact Red Cross for further information and advice.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Natalie and Lina. That's been extremely helpful, and especially for companies as they're either starting out on this journey, or even if they have a modern slavery response plan in place, they can understand a little bit more about the nuances and the sensitivities involved. And thank you all so much for watching. If you'd like to learn more about the UN Global Compact, you can visit us at unglobalcompact.org.au, and I'll of course link all of the resources and links that we mentioned in today's session in the description below. And of course, thank you one more time, Natalie and Lina, for all of your help. That's been brilliant.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. We'll see you in the next one.